Well, I've been thinking here quite a little this evening, listening to the chatter that's going on, and a lot of it's just been plain chatter. It doesn't mean much except that you're enjoying each other and having a good time with each other. Now, this is the way it should be. And but I don't know, maybe something of the heritage and background that comes to us. I think about my grandfather, nicknamed Peg Leg Hansen. He lost his leg in the mountains in a lumbering accident, and he was a hard-working man. He was a man that wasn't exceptionally tall. He wasn't like I am. I get my height from my mother's folks. But Grandfather Hansen was a broad man, and this way too. Not fat. He had a very, very heavy chest. And as my dad says, he was quite a strict man. And when he called, he says, we children didn't wait and say what for. We responded right now, because they knew what the call meant. And he was firm, but he says he was a very good man. And he was a very industrious man. He had, when he first came to this country, as an immigrant boy, he worked for President Wilford Woodruff in Bountiful for a while before he came into Logan. And then my grandfather on the mother's side was one of the, came from Denmark with the first company of saints, organized saints that ever came from the Scandinavian country. And the captain of that company was Lorenzo Snow, who was an apostle at that time. So when they got over here to the Utah, he was, when Lorenzo Snow was called by Brigham Young to go up and settle Brigham City, he took my grandfather with him. So Grandfather Olson was one of the very first settlers in Brigham City. Grandfather Hansen, my grandfather, had the first house in Logan City that ever had shingles. He was in the lumber business and had a sawmill, and he bought a shingle making machine, and the very first shingles he made, he put on his own home. So, and it was over on about a block and a half west on 3rd North in Logan. In that area there is where he lived. So he was a pioneer in the Logan, Cache County area. My dad was born and raised in Logan. He, to me, was the best dad in the world. He had problems. He had faults. There's no two ways about that. But at his funeral demise there were 3 bishops. His present bishop at the time and 2 ex-bishops. And they all made the statement, here lies a man that was a full tithe payer, and he was strictly honest. They all made the same type of a comment about it. My dad was honest. When he built his new home, the Anderson Lumber Company said we never had an opportunity of sending him a bill. He would come in before the first of the month and pay up for what the materials he'd used that month. He says we never had an opportunity of sending him a charge account. That was the type of man he was. Now, I was born there in College Ward. I think Joe took me for a little trip, and we took some pictures on his machine like this is here, and of where I had been raised and born. I was born in College Ward. When I was a young boy, now this may surprise you, when I was a young boy, I saw the first automobile that ever came to Cache County or to Logan. A man by the name of Murdoch purchased the automobile. He run a candy factory and candy kitchen there in Logan. And you know, that automobile was very fast. He got it up to 10 miles an hour. And it didn't have a steering wheel. It had a rod straight up, bent like an L, and he'd pull this rod back and forth to steer it. And it had chain drive. And if you saw the buggies, pictures of buggies like they had in the pioneer days with dashboards and tops, that's what the automobile looked like. Except it didn't have the shafts on for a horse. When the first, as I remember, of Logan, there were no sidewalks. There was no paved roads. The sidewalks, some of the stores had some planks in front of them, and that's what amounted to the sidewalks. And then they had the old railroads, interurban, run right down Main Street. And the freight trains went down Main Street. You remember that, don't you, Gladys?
Mm-hmm. Yes, right down the middle.
I worked for that company, driving bus for them. Later on, the streets were paved and such as that. I drove bus for them for 5 years, up and down Logan. I went up and down, up and down, up and down 100,000 miles a year, within about 8 or 10 blocks. Up and down, up and down. The fact of it is, if you got sleepy at night, if the bus happened to bump just a little bit, you knew he was off course, so you get her off course quick. That's a fact. That's an absolute fact.
I'm sure.
You knew just about where each bump was.
Mm-hmm.
And if it didn't bump just right, you was off course.
Of course.
The fact of it is, we got quite proficient with driving them. The little old lady that rode on the bus, she had a flower shop there in town, and when she would get up and there'd be a lot of traffic up around the Utah State, why, they was parked there for the ball game, this, that, and the other. She says, I can't figure out how you guys get that bus through there. You must bend it. We'd get through. It was an interesting experience. But back to the boyhood days, I was only 8 years old when my mother passed away. And her youngest child was 2 hours old, so she passed away with childbirth. And of those 6 children now, so that left my daddy with 6 of us. Of those 6 children now, Grandma and I are the only couple complete. My oldest sister, her husband's passed away. My second sister, her husband's passed away. The third sister's passed away, and her husband's passed away. And Glenn and his wife have both passed away. And Mary in Salt Lake, her husband's passed away. So, and we are the only couple that's intact of those 6 children. And yet, when Mother died, Dad married again. And I am the oldest of 17 of us. And we had, it's a good family. We had, when Dad, when they passed away, when the parents all passed away, the attorney came with Dad's will. Why, he made a statement that the way this will, it just happens to be written up, the second family gets everything. And I'll never forget, Uncle Nog, my brother, he spoke up. He says to the attorney, listen, we're one family. We all take an equal part. We're brothers and sisters, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's the way it was. We are been together. We haven't associated as much as a lot of families do, but we are pretty well one family. I'll have to tell you a challenge that was given to me, if I can hold my emotions, when I was 8 years old. That's when my mother passed away. And my dad told me the last words that my mother ever spoke in mortality was, Earl, take care of the children. which is a challenge with those 6 children, 5 brothers and sisters, I have tried to fulfill. And when you take, when they're married and they have their families, and this and all of those things come along, and under certain situations, you gotta be very careful, because Kim don't want Todd interfering with Kim's business, and Todd don't want that. They want to handle that thing with their families and with their wives, and that's the way it should be. Now, how are you going to watch out for your brothers and sisters under so certain circumstances? So I didn't say much, but I kept a very watchful eye on it, a very watchful eye. Now they're coming to me now that their companions are gone. They're coming to me and talking, and I'm learning a lot of things. And your grandmother was raised on the farm. Dad had 40 acres, 80 acres, and then he bought another 20. He had 120 some odd acres, and he had 40 head of milk cows, 100 head of livestock. Didn't make what kind of weather it was. We fed those stock, rain, hail, sunshine. We were out every day. I got used to working out in the yard, out in the crib. We was up at 5 o'clock in the morning, day in, day out. And we didn't get to bed until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, but we were ready to go to bed when it came, because we had been working all day long. Get up at 5 o'clock and milk 20 cows, take care of the horses, feed 100 head of stock in the cold winter months, and then repeat the cycle again, starting about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And by the time you got done, you was ready for bed. But I enjoyed it. I was happy with it. Finally, Grandma's been telling some of you of the...
I've been telling anybody.
Nobody.
Oh, there's some of the others have heard.
That's what you told Jeff.
Grandma came from a very industrious family, and a very good family. Her father and her grandfather were rock masons from Overfield country, and if you get into Wellsville, there in the south end of Cache County, and see all those rock houses, this is houses that was built by the Glenn family. In fact, for the state of Utah, when they widened the road, the highway there in Smithfield, there was a rock bridge in Wellsville. There was a rock bridge where a little creek went across. And they looked that over, and they said, this is perfect. They just put some ends on it. That rock bridge is still there under the highway that the Glen people built. They really built. In fact, that is, Grandpa Glenn, her father, I was amazed at him. He could take a rock, big rock, he could lay it here on the floor where he could work it, on the pavement or on the ground, you know. He'd walk around that rock, he'd look at, he'd study it. And he would take a rock hammer and give it a lick, and you'd think that he'd cut that rock with a knife. It'd just be so straight and pretty to cut, the break. He understood rocks. Now this is something that I don't understand. I don't know if anybody else in this room would really understand. But Grandpa Glenn could look at a rock and study that rock, and he could know the grain of that rock, and the way it would break and the way it wouldn't break. Because it's like everything else, it's put together a certain way. But he understood it. And so her mother's folks, Grandma's mother folks, were sent over to the Bear Lake country to settle that country by Brigham Young. The Gibbonses and the Westons. That's where they were, and that's where the Gibbons and the Westons intermarried, and that's Grandma Gibbons. Glenn was, her mother was a Glenn, but her mother was a Gibbons, and her father, her father was a Gibbons, and her grandfather was a Weston. Grandmother. Let me get that right. Grandma was the Weston, Grandpa was the Gibbons.
Okay.
He was a very, very good man. In fact, he was the one that's come forth with this idea that Joseph has been trying to learn ever since we started coming down. There's a little bit of bad in the best of us. There's a little bit of good in the worst of us. So how does it behoove any of us to talk about the rest of us? When you stop and think that, there's quite a philosophy to that little, and her mother was very full of that. Very, very full of it. She was a beautiful woman, and a good woman. I loved her.
Your mom.
Very much. But Alta, your grandmother, has, I think, told you some of the experiences that she had when she was weighing beets for the sugar company. What a great big old bashful hunk this guy was. Not old bashful. A young lady like this here would look at me. I would, at that age, I would go as red could be. I couldn't talk, I couldn't stammer, I couldn't anything. I was one of the most bashful boys that you ever see. But finally, I'll have to tell you about my first date with her.
You better go back further and tell us about the first experience. Make sure he gets it right, Mom.
My first date with her.
Well,
My first attempt to get a date with her.
about this show.
The what? Oh, in the show house. Yeah, as a young man, I had went, and this is why in a lot of things, for this fellow here, that there's something to that. I am a firm believer of impressions, and I'm a firm believer that the Lord will help you in any part of your life, in hunting a wife, in hunting a husband, in hunting your field of endeavor for a living, or your field of anything that you go into. If you will let the Lord lead you, He will lead you to success. Well, I, as a young man like you guys, went to a picture show. And so I was up there in the cheapest seat I could buy to see a picture show. And while I was sitting there, there was a couple of girls, a couple of young ladies. Lower down, was up in the balcony area, lower down, got up and went out. They had seen the show, because we go anytime to see the show, and I come in later than they. They went out. Who's that? I knew that one girl. I had never met her. I had never met her. But I knew I had seen that and conversed with that girl somewhere, somehow, somewhere. I never knew how or what. I never seen her again until I brought a load of sugar beets to the weigh scales to the sugar factory, and there that said girl was the weigh girl. And you got her reactions to me.
I love you.
You got her reactions to me. Well, anyway, now, it come towards Halloween time in October, and our wards at that time usually had Halloween dances in the community, the rural wards. There was a dance coming up, and I thought maybe it'd be a nice idea if I took that girl to a dance. And so I proceeded, when I got the beets unloaded in the scale house, little scale house, there was a little window about that wide. I could just get my shoulders, and about 3 feet high, and the window was half up, so there wasn't much of a hole, you see. But I'd got my head and shoulders poked into there. I was in the process of asking her if she'd go to the dance. And while I was doing that, one of my friends on a load of beets was coming up to weigh in his beets. He took a beet about the size of this bowl, and he threw it at me. and he hit me right in the butt. Right in the butt.
Target.
And she couldn't figure out why I come putting her boom right through the window.
So anxious.
And I jerked myself out of the window and went after that fellow. Never finished making arrangements for a date. Never finished the hour when I'd be there to get her.
He never said.
She'd agreed that she'd go, but never finished the hour. I got in the wagon, went home, and she just took a chance, and I showed up. So we went to the dance. We had a wonderful time. Never took her out again until her aunt, one of her aunts, on a New Year's night evening, New Year's night before New Year's Eve. New Year's Day, yeah. So it was New Year's night. New Year's Day. She was when her parents was at the family for a New Year's get together. You know, families get together like we are here tonight. And her aunt was quite a joke. She was full of fun. And she called me up. And she started pouring the, what'll I say? Bull.
Propaganda.
That's one way of putting it. Started kidding me about this and that she wanted a date. She told me she was this lady and then she told me she was this girl. I knew a girl over in Wellsville. I knew 2 or 3 girls in Providence as well as Alta. And finally, she finally talked me into a date and told me where to go, and I knew who it was then. We took her. I took her to the dance that night. Her Aunt Beulah went with us to chaperone us. New Year's Day. Well, you know, then I'll have to tell you the thing that kind of got me thinking just a little bit was she had took part in a musical play as a girl in her ward, and she'd learned a little song.
Don't tell them that. Putting all the details in here.
And she sang parts of that song to me.
To you.
Yeah, you made me love me so. You made me
Well,
love
it made me love you. I didn't want to do it.
me.
Yeah,
I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. And all while she was singing that, her aunt was there like that in her ribs. But I guess that was she pressed the right button that time. I got interested. And I got very interested. And that was in New Year's, and by the
Coldest day of the year.
the 10th of December we were married.
Mm-hmm.
The courtship started from that little song. And we enjoyed each other. Now I'll tell you another little story about the courtship. In the summertime, we were going to go up the canyon and have a nice little dinner. You know, young lady going to treat her boyfriend and all of that, you know. And so the way we went up the canyon, we got up the canyon, got the, what do you call it, the dinner all set. Oh! Got the silverware.
I just have a pocket knife, a nice dinner, right? Fried chicken, potatoes,
Eat it with your fingers.
So what did you do?
What did I do? I got a pocket knife.
Oh, Boy Scouts, like I was going to say.
I got a pocket knife out and I whittled out some forks and stuff that we could handle the meal with and the meat with, and we got by very good. Very good. Very good.
Nice.
Well, after that, this bashful guy had something in mind that day. He had something in mind that day. And even though there was no silverware or nothing like that, it didn't deter the mission that was intended.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we'd had our dinner and had our fun about the dinner. Then that's when I asked her if she would marry me. She said, oh, you don't want to marry someone that forgets all of her silverware and all everything like that. She tried to put me off. Finally, she said yes. Of course, that's the nature of a woman. Give you a
Oh, but I was so embarrassed and all.
Yeah, after that.
Oh, napkin, no silverware.
And you want to marry me? Had you talked to her dad?
I'm just prepared.
They give you an excuse, right? Keep trying.
And so we went home. In fact, I asked her mother about it. Her mother kind of cried a little bit. She agreed it would be all right. We could get married on the 10th of December. And since then, I've been trying to figure out this girl that I was going with must have been very anxious to change her name. Very anxious. Very anxious.
I just turned 19.
Very anxious to the morning that I went up to get her, to take her and take her to the temple, it was 24 degrees below zero. That's why I say she must have been very anxious.
Gee.
And we didn't have closed automobiles like this. I had a little, what they called a coupe, a Chevrolet coupe at that time, and it had side curtains on, cloth curtains with isinglass in it, and some of the isinglass was even broke out. So we got to the temple. I took her, and her mother went with us. One-seated car, roadster. But up there, we didn't have like the half of the automobiles today. No antifreeze or anything. So you've been up in Logan, most of you. So at the southeast corner of the temple, at the top of the boulevard there, at the top of the hill, I parked the car facing downhill. Got out of the car, drained the radiator, opened up. In them days, we had a petcock on the motor block, and we drained the motor block too, and the radiator. Drained the whole thing, went in, and completed our official business. Was out of the temple then about 2 o'clock that afternoon. And went out to the car, where I had it parked. I got my new wife in the car and her mother, and I gave the car a push down the hill. You see, there wasn't many automobiles in them days back in 1924. Very, very few automobiles. No stoplights, no semaphores, no nothing like that. And we just coasted down that hill, down the boulevard, down Center Street there, and uphill incline that we just coasted clear down to Main Street on Center Street there. And there was a service station there. I swung into the service station, and they said, "What do you want?" I told them where I'd been. Heavens, they were really big help. They really big help. They called the petcocks for me. I didn't have to do a doggone thing. Went in the building and got some warm water, filled up the radiator, and we got it covered up again. Got it started again in that cold weather. How much do you owe you? Nothing. Go have a good day.
Yeah, what's your wedding day?
That's the kind of service station people were. I haven't been doing business with them, but that's what they done. They said, "Go have a good day." So we went on out home to her folks, and her aunt had been there, and we had a lovely dinner at her parents' home. With my parents been there too. We really enjoyed it. When we moved, the first apartment I moved, we lived in the old brown house that Dad had, because Dad had just built a new home, and I had lived in the new home 3 months before I got married, because it was being built that summer that we got married. And I only lived in the new home 3 months, and the old home was there, so we got 2 rooms out of that. Well, that was one of the coldest winters, I tell you, 24 degrees the day we got married below. And it was that way for about 30 days. It didn't change. And we didn't have a central heated home like this. We didn't, we had a coal cook range, and we'd have a fire going in that, and the stove would be probably red hot 10:30, 11 o'clock when we'd go to bed. The tea kettle the old tea kettle. You know what a tea kettle is?
The new tea kettle, we had a brand new tea kettle.
I know. But you know what a tea kettle is?
Something that holds water.
Yeah, with
It's about that big around, probably about that high, with a spout on it.
Okay.
Yeah, but like when we had the whistle.
And
They didn't whistle back then, but
that would be on the stove, with the stove practically red hot. It will be practically boiling and hot. And by the time we got up in time to milk the cows, 6:30, 7 o'clock, that tea kettle would be frozen solid. And the quilts, our breath on the quilts, we'd have ice frost on the quilts. We'd freeze on the quilts.
Yeah, froze, the milk froze, the fruit froze, the potatoes froze.
you froze.
We didn't have a fridge, everything we had was
Jeez.
This was our start.
we had to put everything in the oven to thaw it out first. Leave it toasted or even frozen.
Even the eggs would freeze. We'd have to thaw them out before we could break them.
They were break. There was no place you could put them. It was cold in the house all the
Yeah, right.
See, there was no summer heat, no central heating. It wasn't built for it at all. And it's the kind of a home that I was raised in as a boy. And when Saturday night comes, that was
That night. I don't want to be around that night.
and that was that. And you know, with the family, the big no central heating now. Remember, winter, no central heating. By the cook stove, the big cook stove, it'd be there, and we'd hang up the curtain, and we'd have that galvanized tub. You've seen them, about so big around, and about that deep. And there was a lady that used to be in the Sun Utah Pioneers that wrote a song about that galvanized bath. And boy, it was humorous. But anyway, you would bathe in that. The little ones are starting as they keep going, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Me being the oldest,
had all the dirty
You laugh.
I had the battery, yeah, as you say it, and I was the last one in. We just have the conveniences like that. But we enjoyed it. It was things that I don't think that there's very few people today remembers anything about. Those, so to speak, pioneer days. When we first as a child, we never had our Christmas trees had candles, no electricity. I was about 14, 15, 16 years old, somewhere along in there, when we got the first electricity in our home. It cost Dad around $150 to get electricity from the road to the house. The line went by, and they come along with the program that they could do that. So it was I was along about 14, 15, 16 years old, along in there. I don't remember the year when we got electricity. Electricity was something very new. And of course, like all kids, we got to experiment. We just got to experiment. I got to tell you a joke on myself. Experimenting. Dad had the lights strung so they was out in the morning too, you see. And so the old porcelain socket sticking out this way. I heard that moisture will combat electricity. It's brand new, you see. Brand new kid that hadn't any grade. You kids have grown up with it, so you know all about it. But I hadn't grown up with it. See, I didn't know a doggone thing about it. Not a thing. But I had heard that moisture or water will conduct electricity, and moisture will cause problems. Well, now I just wonder if that socket gets wet, what it'll do. If it'll blow a fuse, or what it'll do. I just wonder. I was experimenting.
Oh, man.
I was experimenting, so I turned the globe out of it. And there was, of course, the brass button and what do you call it. I stood there and looked at it for a little while, and
Oh, no.
I was close enough that there was just a little bit of a thread, just like a hair. I knew that moisture conducted electricity fast. Very fast. It felt like a pin. It went up on a foot in my lip.
Oh, man.
I knew moisture, after that, I knew moisture conducted electricity. See, my experiment was complete.
That's right.
Well, isn't this how we learn?
Yep, you and
A
Einstein,
lot of
right?
times, yeah,
Isn't this how we learn?
That's right.
by experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had a lot of fun on the. I remember one time, boys are boys, regardless whose boys they are. You know that as well as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Boys are boys. Well, my brother Glenn was about so much younger than me. He'd see I had 3 sisters between him and I. And I thought he should do a certain amount of work in the chores after school. And he kind of resented it one night. What I was trying to get him to do. Me being the older, why, he could see me, something building up inside of me, you know. He could see that what was happening, and he took off to the house just as hard as he could go. He was going just as hard as he could run, and I was right behind him, coming up just a little bit faster. And when he got about halfway to the house, my one foot caught his backside. And he just went, boom! Dad saw it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you need.
Dad saw it. This guy had to do all the chores all alone that night, besides getting a good tanning. But those are the things that you remember. We had, going on the farm, Dad had, he was good to me. He got the ponies. I remember when I was just a young fellow, he got a pony that, she was very gentle. We called her Gravy. She was gray. She had a club foot because she'd cut it in, and she was kind of a cripple. Wasn't exactly the best, but she was gentle. Gentle as could be. And so Earl and Gravy and Chalky. Now, who's Chalky?
Another.
That was my dog.
The dog.
Oh, that was your dog.
What was his name?
A brown-colored dog. We called him Chalky.
Chalky.
Earl, Gravy, and Chalky.
Called Chalky.
And as I said, she was gentle. We used our old swimming holes. We didn't know what swimming pools were. These were swimming holes out in the ditches and the creeks and in the rivers. That's where we swam. In our native suit. The girls at that day, they'd usually wear a dress like this when they went. They didn't go native. But we boys, we were native.
We were.
But we were on the road to the swimming hole. Bunch of us. These boys along about 14, 15. They were sitting on old Gravy. Going along, and there's either 5 or 6 of us. I forgot how many. But that put us pretty well to the back end. So the boy that was on the back end, the horses went going along, you know, the back side broad, and it goes up like this. Back and forth. And finally, the one boy, the back boy, got too far to the side and he couldn't get back. But his arms were wrapped around that. Why, 1, 2, 3, we just
Follow the line.
right down on the ground, right under the Gravy, and she just stood there and looked at us. We got up and away we went.
Crazy kids.
Now, inasmuch as brought about swimming, we had a swimming hole that was probably always over our heads. But it was down where a canal went over a fall. And when there was too much water, there was more water went down over. They had a cement flume and then a wooden flume that went steep and then went flat. And you know, we used to get on a burlap sack and ride down that flume. And when it hit where the water hit out in the water, sometimes we'd go maybe 100, 150, 200 feet, something like that, before we'd come up out of the water again. And it was fun. It was scary, but it was fun. And we when the water whirled around like that, sometimes we wouldn't slide. We'd just go over and get in the water and go down with the stream. It was fun. Maybe one of these days I'll take my boys down and show where that old hole is, see if it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a lot of fun at that place. We go over to the river by the old sugar factory there. There was willows all over the river bottoms there, so there wasn't buildings built there now like it is. It was just rivers and so on. There was a hole there that we put one of these buggies in, and I guess it must have been 25 or 30 feet deep. Wow, it was deep. We had a lot of fun there. And that was the type of swimming. We didn't have swimming pools like they got today around the recreational areas and the centers and things of that sort. And we enjoyed it.
How long after you're married did you build your home that you're in now, Dad?
Where we're at?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were Raymond. Raymond was born in the last home. And actually, we did not build a home.
Oh,
Joe James in Providence
mm-hmm.
in 35, no, 30, in 30 and 31, 1930 and 31.
Mm-hmm.
During the Depression, he owned that property and he borrowed money and built the home to make a job for he and his boys. And so they got the home built. And I was watching as they was going by. At that time, I was driving bus for the railroad company. And I made a proposition, but I couldn't get the money to buy the home. So instead of buying the home, I took my wife and family and we went to Canada. It was the first vacation that we ever had in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And one that I remember very much. We went up through the Yellowstone Park, through Montana, and on up to Cardston, Canada. When we got to Cardston, I got to the Canadian line there. The man that was the patroller, or the man that led us across the Canadian line, was my cousin. Second cousin. I didn't know him first, but I met him when I told him what my name was. His name was the same. And he invited us to a dinner at his place in Cardston. We got to know more about him. You see, Grandpa Hansen's one brother was a polygamist.
Mm-hmm.
He had about 2 or 3 wives, and when the federal government got to processing, he was one of them that went up to Canada, Carson. That's how Carson got settled. That's where the polygamists went. That's more of them settled where they went to get away from the federal.
Later.
And so he was one of those boys, and we got. In fact, we went up on our trip to see Alta's folks. So we had 3 aunts living up in that area at the time that it moved up there. And we went up to them. Her father and mother and her grandfather and mother was up there on the trip, so we went up too. And when we got up there, I found that I had as many or more relatives than she did. We had quite an experience. We went to a home up there and finally found the place and went in, and there was a young man there sitting there, and I says to him, we introduced to him, and I said, oh, he says, Glenn Hansen. Yeah. I said, I've got a brother, Glenn. I says, what's your middle name? Hans. Glenn Hansen. Exactly the same name as my brother. And they were second cousins. What day was you born? This was getting interesting to me. This was getting very interesting to me. What day was you born? The 20th of December. The same day that my brother was born. What year? He named the year. The same year that my brother was born. There was 2 Hansens born
Twins.
on December the 20th, the same year. And they were only second cousins apart. Didn't know about each other. Now the only way, if you got into genealogy, how would you tell the 2 of them if you got to live? You'd have to absolutely get their parentage before you could distinguish. And so this was an interesting experience at that time. We went after we came back from that Canadian trip. My this is at the time that I was driving bus for the railroad. I've had a varied experience in my life, in my work. My education is the 8th grade in grade school and 1 quarter at Utah State. In the quarter at Utah State, I took blacksmithing major, blacksmithing and carpentry. Learned to work with my hands, learned how to build. And at that time, that's when that flu went around after World War I. The flu went around and it took me out of college because everybody in the neighborhood, like that it is, me and one of my cousins, took care of Dad's 40 cows, his dad's 20 cows, another neighbor's 30 cows, besides feeding all their stock. We were going about 16 hours a day, the two of us, to take care of them because all the rest of them was in bed with the flu.
Yeah.
They were in bed with the flu. Okay. We got them pretty well, got them all up and going again, and then it was my turn to take the flu. And I had it, and it was strong fellow, but that flu, it took more of them to death than any other type of people. The weaklings that gave up quick, they got over it. And that, but the strong fellow that kept fighting, I went down with the flu. 3 days after, I figured I was well enough, and I got up and let it go. The next day, I went back to bed, and I didn't get out of bed for 8 weeks.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
In fact, they didn't know whether they was going to save me or not. And I had a sister that was in the bed, and she was in bed with that flu for 12 weeks. She got better, and then she's my sister that got auto-pedestrian accident, and she was killed sometime later. But that was quite an experience, taking care of all those cattle, feeding and choring with the flu. That was an experience.
No
I'll
bet.
bet, yeah.
She didn't feel like it very much at all.
So that's where my school ended, because in fact they closed Utah State down because of flu for a period of time. They closed all the meetings. The church was closed right up. We didn't go to meeting or anything for a period of time. They were trying to control that epidemic. And when the boys came home from the army, the boys, they were a little older than I am, because I wasn't quite old enough to get in the army. When they came marching home into Logan, we that were there to see them come in, we all had to wear a mask. Everybody wore a mask. If you're out in the public, you wore a mask. You know, walking down the street or anywhere, you wore a mask. You didn't go down at all. And so that was quite a period of time to have this World War I had experience there. I was 18 years old. And me and my cousin, Sir Jolson, lived just across the street from me. We had made plans. And our plans was, when we got the beef crop in, and got the paycheck for the sugar beets came on the 5th of November. And we had sugar beets. Both of us boys had a share in some sugar beets, and we used to get some checks. And when we got those checks, our deep secret wasn't shared with our parents.
No.
That was not shared with our parents. Because when we got that money, the intent was to slip away from Logan, because we'd have money to buy a ticket, get to California and join the army and get in the war. That's where we wanted to go. We were 18 years old. I don't think we were crowding. We were crowded about 17. I don't think we were 18 until March, either one of us. He was only 3 days younger than me. And so that was the plan. The day that we were ready to go, got things straight between us, so we were ready to go. they signed the armistice, and no soldiers they wouldn't take no more volunteers.
Oh,
So our bubble burst. Our
We
bubble
never made it
burst.
to California and joined the army.
Yeah, our bubble burst.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't get the experience that we were
Isn't that
anticipating as boys. You know, now I've got older, why, that was a terrible experience to look forward to. But that
Oh,
time I was
yeah.
full of a lot of excitement.
Yes, right.
There's a lot of excitement.
Or you'd have been real, probably homesick and whatever. Huh?
Yeah.
When we were talking about getting married, like he said, well, he said, I'm either going to go on the bum, go on a mission, or join the army. But you got married. I knew his dad wouldn't send him on a mission. I didn't want him to go on the bum, and I didn't want him to join the army.
So she saved my life again.
Oh, she married you, huh?
So it's been quite interesting. Some of these things have been quite interesting. Now, activities in the church has been many and varied for both of us. Your grandmother has been a primary teacher for over 45 years.
Nice primary present.
She has been, she received a special certificate from the general authorities for her service on her 45th year. And she has received the Silver Beaver from the Scouting Organization for her service to boys, because that bee and those boys that was graduating from primary, she had them. And there was not one boy that didn't graduate. There was not one boy but what was ready and took his scout examination, and they got his second-class rank. They all got it. I remember helping her many times, taking her out. One experience with a little Indian boy that was living in the ward at the time. It was raining like that day they took out. He enjoyed that trip. He sat there, he built a little fire in front of him, sat there cross-legged, petted the fire, and he cooked his meal, and the white boys were sitting there wondering, grunting and groaning about how they were going to do it. And this little boy said, "This is just like home. I'm enjoying it." I was there with her because I helped her out a little bit, and I really enjoyed that experience, watching that little Indian boy and how well he done it. And the other boys got along. They done along fine, but they done a little grunting. And we whites we grunt every once in a while.
Yeah, we do.
And so that was her experiences. She's been my experiences in the church. I was in the first organization when they first started what they used to call the Master M-Men. M-Men and Gleaners, you remember. The M-Men, they had them. I went through the M-Men. I was the first secretary of our class group for M-Men work. I thought I had it made so that I could get in. I got things and other things my kids do at that age. And I missed out on it. But years later, working in the mutual, I worked on the mutual board for about 25 years as a scout leader. And years later, I was the state mutual president with the service and the things that I had done, the program the church announced. I was awarded the Master M-Men award. And so I've been awarded that. I served in a bishopric as a counselor. When I was a young man, I'll get back to our marriage. I'll get back to that a minute again. Because, the program of the church was not as well organized as it is now. I was ordained a deacon when I was 11 years old. When they put us on a computer, the computer kicked it out. And I had to provide them with my certificate of ordination and the date. Then they accepted it. And I had the certificate and all of that, but I was ordained a deacon about 2 months or 3 months before I was 12 years old. And then I was a deacon for years. And I was ordained a teacher probably when I was 16, 17 years old. And when I asked her to get married, I was still a priest. I was 22 years old. So they didn't have they didn't have
the age bracket.
And I didn't understand the organization of the church. So when I went and asked for a recommend to go to the temple, I sure provided my bishop with a complicated request.
Yeah.
Because I was asking too close to the wedding date. By the time the bishop interviewed you, you see, at the time I asked, he got it to the stake president interviewed you, and it got to the high council, they got the approval, and got back to the bishop. The days were going by fast. And we come pretty near having to postpone the wedding for a week or 10 days. Because of that, I didn't understand the workings of the church. And so, but the bishop happened to be one of my uncles, and so it got worked out. And we got the temple on the arranged date. So then we moved in, as I said, the cold home. Finally, I bought into a business in Logan, an auto parts business. We called it the H&P. There was a man by the name of Peterson. Of course, this guy Hansen, so an H&P auto parts business.
Oh.
I was in that for a few years. As a young man, I loved to get my hands greasy. I loved to work with automobiles. I loved machinery. In fact, my cousin, Serge, says whenever we went on a ride in the automobile, we always wanted Earl to be with us.
Yeah.
Not because we wanted to ride, but we needed him when the car broke down. And so he said he could fix an automobile and the rest of us couldn't do anything with it at all. Now that brings up another little interesting incident. We were in an old Model T, and at that time they didn't have self-starters on them. You had to wind them up, crank it up.
Yep.
And so we were kind of a nice warm spring day, like the weather is here today. There were about 4 or 5 of us in a Ford that one of our friends had that decided we was going up the canyon for a ride. That was a big thing to go for a ride in a little old automobile in those days. And we went up the canyon, and there was a stream there about so deep and probably about that wide. And we wanted to get over on the other side. And we sat there and thought, well, can we make it? One of the fellows says, well, I think maybe you can do this. We'll make it. Okay. So they hit the stream hard.
Uh-oh.
They're laughing. You know what's happening. They splashed water all over everything. Well, what happened, we got the front wheels across and up on the darn thing died. It was all watered out.
Yeah.
So we took the old timer off, and we took this, and we took that. We fixed the spark plugs, and we worked, and we dried. We got cloth, and we got this, and we got that, and we dried everything we could think of. And we cranked, and we cranked, and we cranked, and we cranked until we'd about all 5 of us given out. Just kept a cranking. Finally, one of the little boys backed up and looked at the automobile. Standing in front of it, he picked his foot up and kicked it on the radiator. You damn. Why don't you start? He talked out loud, not like I did.
Uh-huh.
He reached down, a half crank, and went. Of course, we had to kid him after that. Why didn't you talk to it quicker?
Yeah.
You talk to it.
And so we got out of the jam, and then when we went back, we went careful. We got by awful easy. Now that's some experience. And then the roads to another experience with that old Ford with those boys. The road was quite narrow. In fact, it was only winding up in one corner. When we was going up the canyon, just winding in the old dirt road, you know. And no way could anybody stop.
Mm-mm.
No way could anybody stop. But the driver had plenty presence of mind. It was Ezra Zollinger,
Yeah.
same age as me. A friend of mine, he just that wheel and went right straight up the mountainside.
Oh my
He
God.
went just as far up as he could, and put the brake on, the thing slid back down right behind the other cars and went past.
Gee.
Close quarters, close call. That's close call.
That's close call, yeah.
And so, that, as we got further on, the first automobile after we were married, my little old Chevrolet that I took her in to get married, that Dad had bought, and I got in a land trade with him. Then I had to buy an automobile because it started wearing out. The first automobile I ever bought in my life, I paid $10 for.
Oh,
How much?
man.
$10.
That's about that one out there in the driveway's worth now.
I paid $10 for it. Yeah, it's a Ford.
The Model
Red
T?
Ford, huh?
The Model T?
No,
or
it
what?
was a red Ford. Ford.
Oh, a red Ford.
Two-seated one for $10.
I'm tough on them, everything.
Gee.
It run good, and we run it for quite some time. Then, when I finally got into the automobile business, parts business, there was a car came in, and I bought that, took that, and it was a Dodge Coupe. It was a good car, and I traded that off to the first new automobile I ever bought in my life. And I bought that. It was '29 Chevrolet sedan,
I can
four-door sedan, glass doors and everything. It was a nice automobile. I paid all of $800 for a brand new car.
Yeah.
Brand new. Four-door, the best Chevrolet that they made at that time.
What year was that? 29?
29 or 30.
Can't buy an engine for that much.
That was about
No, we had it before Raymond.
That's when we
Engine's
took
been
to
about what?
Canada.
Yeah, I know, we took it when Raymond.
He was born in 31.
Did you get it, were you able to get it in Logan, Dad, or did you
Yeah,
have
we
to go
bought
to
it in
Salt Lake?
Logan. Now, here's my experience with that car and my auto parts business. The other fellow sold out, and my banker told me not to. Hold on, and this man is buying, will help you. It took him just 1 year to slide me off the plate. I didn't have a job. I didn't get sold out or anything. I didn't have anything. All I had was my debts.
Yeah.
And so I had just bought this automobile.
You had how
Just
many
a few
kids?
months before that.
You had Ruth and
Ruth and Ray and Ray.
Ray.
And so I went to Brother Merkley, Bishop Merkley. He was the manager of the cash auto. They were the agents for the Chevrolet in Logan. I went to him. I said, now, Bishop Merkley, I said, I don't want the mark on my record that you had to repossess a car. I don't want that mark. I said, I want to give you the car right now. I don't want no repossession. I just want to give it to you. I told him what was wrong. What had happened. And you know, if that man was alive today, I'd go buy an automobile again on him. He says, Earl, you keep the car. I will personally, out of my own pocket, pay the payments for that car until you get work again. And so I kept the car, and about 3 or 4 months afterwards, I was able to start the payments, kept the automobile. And that was another time that the Lord helped us.
Yes, sir.
Because there I was. I lost my property, lost my job, right in the middle of a depression in 30 and 31, when there were more men than there were work, much more. My cousin, he was driving for the railroad company, and I happened to be at the corner there, he opened the door, sitting there waiting. He said, what you doing, Earl? I says, I'm looking for work. He said, well, I'll tell you what to do. He says, you go down to Ogden, He told me who to see, a man by the name of Malley, and put an application in for bus driver. He says, they'll put an extra man on when school starts up at Utah State. This, you see, was in the summertime. Yet there was not 2 or 3 months since school started. But they'll put an extra man on, and he says, you will have a job then for winter if you meet the requirements. So I went, took the examination, was given the opportunity to take the examinations. I passed the examinations, and then they gave me the road test, and I passed the road test. And when they approved the road test, the other driver across from my cousin says, you can have my job. So I was on full time. He said, I'm quitting and going to California. So I got right on full time. I drove there for full time, driving buses to the railroad. Picked right up out of it. So, and I say again, the Lord was with me. I say again, the Lord was with me.
Okay. If you do your part and do what you're supposed to, you'll be protected and helped.
And so we went on. I drove in for 5 years there, and all of a sudden it was getting to me health-wise. I was having problems health-wise because too much riding, too much setting, too much riding. It isn't good for a fellow, and I was having problems. So I decided to quit, and I tried selling automobiles. That was one of the big mistakes I ever made in my life. I started selling automobiles, selling Chevrolets. I learned a lot about selling automobiles.
I bet you did.
I learned a lot about selling automobiles. I know now when they tell you that they're on the television here, they're charging you 8.8% interest. And you get right down to the bottom of it, the way the contract is written, you're paying better than 17% interest. I know how the contracts are written. I know how they do it. So it just makes me laugh when they say it's 8%. It just makes me laugh. It's no different. And so the longer I sold, the more in debt I got.
Were you on commission?
Huh?
Straight commission?
Yeah. And I was getting in debt more and more. Finally, one of the fellows that was assigned to the used car, he said, I'll work with you. And I'll start turning new buyers to you, and you help turn used buyers to me. And we worked together. And I finally got out. And finally, the manager, I happened to be the floor boy, the salesman, when a certain individual came in to buy a car. And the manager, he apparently knew the fellow, and he took over. And the car was bought. And I got the full $300 commission. He gave me the commission. I told him, I said, I'm done. I'm quitting. Oh, you're just learning how. I said, I'm through. I'm done. I'm not fucking with this anymore. I'm done. Because that $300 got me 100% out of debt with him. And I was getting out when I had a clean sheet. So I got out, and then I started driving bus for the schools. I drove bus for the schools for a few years. Even had the experience of going back to Detroit and taking my wife with me to get a bus. And that was quite an experience. We went by commercial bus to Flint, Michigan, and we picked up the chassis of the truck, 287 inches wheelbase, and it had a gas tank on the frame, then 2x6s across the gas tank for us to sit on. No windshield.
And
you drove it like that?
And then the hind wheels.
247 inches back there.
Oh.
And I had to take that chassis from Flint, Michigan, down to Lima, Ohio. On that, sitting on that gas tank.
350 miles.
Not very comfortable, huh?
More than that. And
It
so
was
we,
comfortable enough for the summertime, sunburn.
summertime, sunburn,
Yeah.
we wore glasses. When we took the glasses off, why, we were brown as Indians with the white. That's exactly, you couldn't tell, you couldn't tell we'd taken the glasses off, except the glasses were brown when they had them on.
Right.
I guess we were a couple looking hayseeds.
That must have been funny.
But we got to Lima where the body was built, to get the body put on the chassis. We had quite an experience there. We stayed at a hotel. And one day when we were coming out of the plant, the body plant, to go downtown, which is a few blocks from where the plant was, down to where the hotel was, a lady came by in a car. She seen us. We were walking. She seen us. And this lady, being a stranger, she's a lady who lived there. And she stopped. Says, "You need a ride downtown?" Which we'd appreciate it, yes, you know. It isn't very often in them countries, in the East, that people will stop. But she says, "There's something about you." So she stopped. She says, "You're from the West, aren't you?" I says, "Yes." "Where?" "We're from Utah." "Oh, I thought so." She says, "You know, I've been there. I know the place." But she says, "I think it's the most artificial place there is in the world." I says, "Why?" "Because they make it green by irrigation." Irrigation. They don't have to irrigate anything back there in Lima, Ohio. There's enough rain, enough that, their lawns and everything is pretty. It's natural. But she said, "Utah, if you got those pretty green places, they're all artificial." We had quite a talk with her, didn't we? It was interesting, and she appreciated us, and we appreciated the ride that she gave us. Now I thought they'd kind of doing a little bit slow on getting the bus body on the chassis because they were really busy. So one night I decided I was going up to the plant in the night because they work 24 hours.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And I went to the plant and I walked in. Nobody was working on my outfit. The boss happened to see me come through the door. And in 5 minutes, he had 4 men on my bus. It was amusing. It wasn't a soul doing, they were all on something else. When I came, I stuck around the rest of the night.
They promised us by a certain time.
Yeah, they promised, and they would never get it if I hadn't been there. I stayed there that night. Then there was another interesting thing about those factories. I was there at the noon hour. When noon hour came, everybody was working. And right in the bus, there was a fellow with the power drill pushing. All of a sudden, his drill stopped. He just laid the drill down and went to dinner. In other words, at the exact hour of noon, the electricity was turned out of the power lines.
Oh.
That was their noon hour signal.
That didn't work.
He knew what it was because he just laid the drill down and went and had his dinner and came back. When he got back there, went to work again.
Yeah.
So that's the way they controlled the noon hour. Just by cutting the power off or adding the power. That was an interesting experience.
Yeah,
Well, we got the bus back about 3 days after school started. But that was all right. They knew we had a man that had to get back from Ogden back there, and he was with another fellow, went for vacation. So he paid us so much to come back with us in that bus. And he helped me drive.
There's him and another couple. Him and his wife and another couple.
Yeah.
There were 6 of us.
And
Back on the bus.
we drove that bus night and day. I would sleep and he would sleep. I would sleep and he would sleep. And we stayed riding the bus and drove it night and day till we got home.
And I guarded them all the time. I didn't sleep one night.
No, I guess you were afraid to go to sleep.
This is a fact. Alta never sleeps in a moving car.
I didn't sleep when he was sleeping. I didn't sleep when the other guy was sleeping.
But you slept when you got home.
No, I don't sleep when I'm riding.
So they went after you got home.
No, I don't remember.
we got home.
I believe I died.
You maybe died, yeah, I bet you would, Grandma.
Probably quiet.
Then, you boys and you young people, I don't know, may wonder why here I am, 83 years old, still working 7 and 8 hours a day.
Some kids are wife came.
An
Tell
industrious worker.
Tell us,
Huh?
Dad. Tell us why.
Well, I've been at the storehouse now in the church welfare services since 1939. That's some 40 some odd years, about 44 years, 45 years. Outside of 1 year that we went, my wife and I were on a mission in Michigan. I was on the payroll until I turned 70 years of age. When I turned 70 years of age, the church came out with a retirement program. It isn't a big one, but there is a retirement program. And President Hansen, who after this experience became the president of the Logan Temple for a few years, President Hansen came to me and he says, Earl, would you stay a few days and help these new fellows get started?
Few days.
A few days. 3 days later, he came back. He says, Earl, I've been and talked to your bishop. I have been and talked to your stake president. You are called to stay.
Mm.
Now, 2, 3 years later, he came through after he'd been released, and he was taking a group through to show him the storehouse, and that's when he was temple president. Some of them came up the temple, and he said, pardon me, he says, you still here? I said, yeah. I says, don't you remember what you done to me? You called me, put me here. And I says, nobody said I can go home yet. He says, I've been released and I can't tell you to go home.
Oh no.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Your grandmother and I then were finally called on a mission to Michigan, and we enjoyed that mission very much. Our mission was a lot different than what you boys' missions have been, because when we got there, we were told to work with the bishops in the ward. And so in Jackson, when we were sent to Jackson, President he told us to work with the bishop. So we went and looked up the bishop. And we were given names of families, part member families, inactive families, and we were told to go and review and revive them if we could. You boys had the experience of going out and finding them and starting the fire going. You can keep the fire going, but when you get someone that the fire has been going, then the fire is pretty burned out, or has burned out. It's twice as hard to start it the second time, and this is the kind of work that we were in. We done some good work. I'm sure we done some good work, because when we got in Howell there, when we got ready to go, I'll never forget, as long as I live, I'll never forget, the Elders Quorum president there, the Elders Quorum, had been a member of the church for 2 years, and now he was the Elders Quorum president. And he says, Elder Hansen, and the last Sunday there, he came up to me, wrapped his arms around, and cried. I didn't know except being in church. He says, Elder Hansen, you will never know what you have done for me. And I didn't know I had done anything for him except talk to him in priesthood meeting, maybe answer a few questions in priesthood meeting and things of that sort. But that's the experience. We've got another sister back there now, right now, in Howell, that we're corresponding with a little once in a while. In fact, we called her just before Christmas a little while. And she says that, in fact, we got close enough to her in a way. She's not a member of the church. She doesn't have any children. She's a widow. Her husband got killed in an electrical accident. But she's been working with the handicapped children all her life. And she's really a compassionate woman for the handicapped and for those that undergo. And we've been there for quite some time. She's very good to the missionaries, very good to the elders. They told us to go see what we could do because she was older. She's about our age. And she's about our age. She's 77 years old. And she's right close. And we were sitting there one day talking to her. And I finally said, Sister Karis. I said, do you know who we are? We've been there many times. I said, do you know who we are? I says, we are Mormon missionaries. Missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Our responsibility is to teach you the gospel. And I said, by golly, we've been here for 45 minutes and you've been teaching us the gospel. And she had. Then I said, why aren't you baptized? Just as still as this rose. Took the wind right out of her sails. She sat there, I bet you, for over 30 seconds, over a half minute, never said a word. And finally she says, Elder Hansen, if I ever join a church, it'll be your church. But she was a woman of prestige, and I think this was the thing that was hardest for her, the hard thing for her to overcome. She was chairman of the Genealogical Committee in the community. Yeah. She was chairman of the Retired Teachers Association. She was chairman of something else, and she was a very active woman in the community. She had great influence with the county commissioner. She had great influence with the representatives from the state to Washington. Mm-hmm. She had great influence with the mayor of Howell. She was an influential individual. And she was afraid, I think, that she'd lose some of that prestige.
Yeah, beautiful home.
Well, yeah, that's
beautiful.
A lot of money.
Money. She'd been to every continent in the world. She'd been to every continent in the world. She is a woman of knowledge. She's a very smart woman. She wasn't going to come out and visit us, but she's got a heart problem, so she can't do it. She wants us to come back and see her again.
Mm-hmm. In the temple.
When the war, new chapel is dedicated.
Chicago Temple.
Oh, yeah.
Chicago Temple is dedicated.
Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what will happen with that. I don't know if we'll ever go because of this physical condition that I have. But anyway, that missionary experience was real good. Now we get back to coming home. Mm-hmm. But when we got back from our mission and our interview with the stake president, reporting our mission, and in our interview with him, he said, now what are you going to do, Earl? Oh, I says, I don't know, I haven't given much thought. I'll probably work at the temple, go to the temple to work, go visit the children, enjoy a few things. Well, he says, they're behind at the storehouse.
Hint.
They need you
They need
at the storehouse. This is where we're sending you. What do you do then?
You go.
Huh?
You go.
You go. That is, if you respond to the callings of the priesthood and got any sense of responsibility toward the church. This is why I'm still in the storehouse, because I have been called to serve.
And tell us, Dad, what you've learned now recently with the computer age.
Computer age?
Yeah.
I bet he's the best computer in the bunch of you.
No.
There he is.
Computer better than any of you.
He probably does.
The storehouse where I work at Logan there, this church got 5 computers in the storehouse church. Logan got 1 of them. Paul had taken, he's got a little computer and Paul has had it for a long while. And he's taken some classes at school in computer science and things of that sort, so he knows a little bit about computers. He talked to me about, I want to put you on the computer. I said, this is where I want you. I'd like you to go.
Oh, that was ready to quit.
Yeah.
Only on the computer.
I don't know whether I want to do anything about that or not, but I'm enjoying it now.
You like it now, huh?
Yeah, I like it now. There's a few things that I found out about it. If you push the wrong button,
That's
You
right.
erase everything,
The
right?
computer's only as good as the operator.
and so, or when I first started, I pushed the wrong button, I get something in there I couldn't get out.
Yeah, right, done that
Then
before.
I'd have-
Memory.
Then I'd get Paul could come, he could work it out for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so with Paul's training and such as that, I've got now so that I can handle the input into the computer of the bishop's orders. In fact, I guess maybe, in fact, Paul says, you're faster than I am. Because when you get the computer there, the software in the computer and the bishop's order forms are comparable to each other.
Uh-huh.
And so, after you've done it like I have now for a few months, I know just about where, what, and why it is.
Yeah.
Just that quick. In fact, Paul was sitting there watching me. He says, how'd you do that? Bing, 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 bing. There showed up. There showed up. In fact, I had the buttons all touched before the computer got to the answer.
Oh, boy.
And it came up there, 4-year-old toilet tissue. He said, you're too darn fast. I don't want to be boastful about it, but I am enjoying the computer work. And since we've got the computer, they have given us, the church has given us the Montpelier storehouse and the Brigham City storehouse. In fact, we're doing all of the work now for the northern end of Utah.
On the computer.
With the computer.
Oh, is that?
Because you're the only one that has one.
Yeah.
Which storehouse?
And the thing with the computer now is that if you work around, sound like the way you laugh.
Well,
Yeah, I work with one.
Things can happen very fast in the wrong way. But the thing that amazed me the first time, we'd had the computer for a month, and I'd been putting in the bishop's orders into the computer. And Paul came, I didn't know nothing about it, but Paul came and set up the computer, put this disk in and set up the computer for the monthly report.
Mm.
And that monthly report, in 44 minutes, the computer had that monthly bishop's orders report out, printed in Word forms. So all we had to do was separate the sheets and send them to the different wards.
Yeah.
And it done it in 44 minutes. The same job before we got the computer that it took Paul and I, the two of us, 3 days to do.
Yep.
That's something.
That's the computer age.
Well, it's so nice to have them around.
Yeah, really.
Yes.
If you know how to use them, it's really
Yeah.
nice to know that. So here's this old gentleman, old guy that's called your grandfather, that's got an 8th grade education, 8 weeks in college, running the computer.
That's great.
That is.
That's
That's
fantastic,
really,
Grandpa.
really great,
That's
Dad.
impressive.
But I can say this, as I've said to you almost before, if you will follow the principles of the gospel, I'm not a very good man in some things. I can confess I'm a mortal being, just like my dad. He was a mortal being. He had his problems. But as I said, he's the best dad that ever was in the world. He was honest. He was a taxpayer. He took care of his church obligation. If they needed help, like work, or things of that sort, my dad was the first man there, always. He was there, and he sent me there. I guess this is where I got my training, to be able to help and willing to help in the church projects. And so I've always been able to do that. And this is the training that I've had. And I think that you boys are getting the same type of training from your father. You've got a good dad. And you've got a group of good uncles and a group of aunts. I think we've got, in my feeling, we've got one. I have to say, I won't say it like lots of people say. We've got one of the very best families there is in the world, and in the church. I'd say one of the best.
I agree. I agree, Dad.
You pushed the wrong button.
The arsonist struck.
So, if you will fall, now you take.
You're built on the
Now,
same grade.
working at the storehouse, they never had any Social Security. They never had any retirement for years. Nothing. What's this guy going to do when he gets so he can't work? Well, it so happened that the church entered the Social Security program. And when I was 70 years of age to retire, I had put in exactly, no more, no less, exactly the 40 quarters that's required to qualify. I had required. And the church had put forth a small, as I indicated, a small retirement program. I got a kick out of Brother Peterson, that was the boss there for a long time when they were first talking about this. He says the presiding bishop of the church came to the storehouse there, and he says to him, because at that time we didn't have Social Security, but they had a retirement program for the people that was working in the general offices of the church. And I'll never forget, Bishop Brown it was. Bishop Brown looked at him, because Brother Peter says to Bishop Brown, he says, Bishop, with the program the way it is, you've got it there in Salt Lake, we don't have nothing, and we don't have Social Security. He says, aren't we members of the church? Aren't we citizens of the United States? He just asked that question. He didn't get an answer. But 10 days after, we had Social Security. And a program came in a little after they got it organized for us. So that today, I am very thankful for the way the Lord has helped Grandma and I. Today we have a better income than I had when I was working, because of the benefits that's been coming from the retirement and the Social Security. We are, I think, well blessed. I don't think there's a couple in the world that's blessed any better. Now, I'm going to tell you another story as I end this up. There was a older brother that was working for the storehouse, and he worked there for about 14 years without pay. He sat there, volunteer, and he was a widower. And so there was a couple, a lady, that baked his bread for him once in a while to help him out, you see. And he was in my ward. But this lady was up in the 5th ward, up close to the temple. Right close to the temple. He had to walk up there to get his bread. So one evening, he went up there to get his bread. And they were sitting there talking. And she finally says to him, Walter, you're working at the storehouse, aren't you? Yes. How do you get paid? He sat there for a little bit. He says, Steve, you're working at the temple, aren't you? Yes. How do you get paid? Of course, that answered her question. Then he added one more little phrase. He let her sit and think about it. Then he added one more little phrase. And I don't want you to think, but I don't think temple work is important. It's very important, because you're doing work for people that can't do anything for yourself. You're doing the same thing with welfare. And he says the only difference between what you're doing, you're working for the dead. I'm working for the living. And by golly, the dead can't argue with you.
That's true.
Now, I think that is quite a nice little thought about the importance of our well-set up welfare service. A lot of people object to it, no two ways about it. If you understand the principles of the welfare services program at the church, you'll appreciate what it is. And I can bear testimony to you that it is the work of the Lord. The missionary work is the work of the Lord. The temple work is the work of the Lord. And if we will but let the Lord direct us, and when we say our prayers, thy will be done, not mine. And let the Lord direct us, and be willing to be taught, and be taught by the Lord through his emissaries. The Lord will take care of us, respond to us, and help us in the problems of life that face us. I know it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I know that each one of us, if we follow that course, will have an opportunity of being in the celestial kingdom. I know it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I got this testimony to you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Sure.
Is Alta going to say anything?
Oh, you wanna say something, Mom? Any postscript?
He told you all there is to tell.
No, he has.
Yes, you have.
There's more.
We wanted to hear the
There's
advice
more.
you gave Jeff.
But I
Oh,
wanna-
yeah, what were you telling
I have
Jeff?
one question.
All over you, put all that on there. No, I should say not.
Wait a minute, Graham, maybe.
That was just Jeff's.
We better put it on there, cause Jeff may need to look over it.
Yeah, you might need to check it out, remember now, what did
Go back
Graham
and
I have a couple
say?
questions.
I'll remember every word I told him.
Okay, well, come on then.
I'll tell you something, one thing about Grandma. She's a seamstress. She is an excellent seamstress.
Yeah.
say she's
I was.
She still
I say
is.
she's a
I
professional
was.
seamstress. In fact, when she was a freshman in high school, the teacher would leave the class and leave her in charge of the seniors that was taking the sewing lesson. She's a master when it comes to sewing. And now one day, during this missionary, when we had our boys, family, and girl group out on missions, she had quite a business. One day, your father, Raymond, came into the house after Joe left on mission. And there in the front room was about 8 or 10 bolts of cloth. Hey, what's going on here? David asked. He stood there for a minute. He says, Joe's on mission. And at that time, you see, this is how the Lord said things. At that time, there was this girl that was in the athletic department up at Utah State. And she got connections with this girl, and this girl made all the uniforms for the cheerleaders at Utah State, both the men and the women.
No, just the ladies.
Just the ladies, huh?
Just the cheerleaders.
Cheerleaders.
76 of them.
Yeah.
76
That's what I
dollars.
think.
2 different times.
That's a lot of uniforms.
And the funny thing of it is, when our age of missionaries was completed, this girl left the school and she didn't get any more uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got a lot of
As I
sewing.
say again, the Lord was there.
I'm still sewing for the mothers and the girls that I sewed for uniforms when they were going to college, and they got children 16, 17 years old.
Uh-huh.
And the mothers came with their daughters to get clothes fit on, and
Yes, when you find a good seamstress.
What about temple clothing, Grandma?
I don't.
You don't do that anymore?
She did my
You
ears.
do quite a bit of it?
You made my ears?
Really? Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to make mine,
Your apron?
my apron.
Grandma can tell you.
You have to get a pattern. They're
Where,
saying
do they have the pattern?
they have them at the Relief Society.
That's the embroidered back now.
No, not if you can embroider them on the machine, they don't.
Kind of machines they got today.
Yeah, the kind of machine you got today, you can embroider them on them. The only qualifications, they should be a certain color of green.
Yeah, I have the right kind of material and all that.
They don't like them too fancy. They'd rather have them just plain square They're cut out and embroidered and fancied around. They don't.
And there's a pattern in the state, Curtis Society.
You still have these
Book, no.
You had to give it
Send
back,
in to
huh?
Sister Mills, yeah.
But nowadays the robes are pretty, you know.
Yeah, I have my grandmother's robe.
I've had one that I've had for 60 years, so I still use.
And then Mom made my wedding dress.
Oh, really?
Oh. Beautiful girl.
I still have it. Unfortunately, I can't, so I'm going to get down to get back in it, that's my vow.
There's a white dress with a lace overlay.
Uh-huh, I've seen the
Oh, it's
pictures of it.
beautiful.
I've never seen it, I'd like to see it sometime.
I'll get that one, see your chest, in my
I
center.
think it would fit me.
Kevin said, don't anyone take it.
It would,
It'd be
it
too
just
short,
about fits you.
A little too
Gladys
small.
wasn't very, but she's very slender.
Doesn't fit me now. Kim had a
I had
couple questions.
two questions. What did you guys do when you were younger to entertain yourselves, like in the evenings?
We used to go to dances, ward dances and things like that. And,
How about at home? I want to know what kind of activities.
Popcorn and
Something like.
read the scriptures.
Sit around and talk.
Brenda.
As young people in my ward, we'd have those ward parties at home.
Because you know you didn't have
A lot of
computers,
fun.
you didn't have television, you didn't have radio.
Different
Well, you
types
had
of
radio.
games.
We
After
still
all.
have the first radio we ever got. Sometime I'll let you hear it.
Okay,
Still have
that'd be
it.
interesting.
We paid
About
$39
55
for
years
it.
old.
Did you make any
We
homemade
paid
type of
$1,000
games?
for our stereo.
Were there any games
We
that you
played
made, like
checkers
you
Oh, yeah, we had a few games that we made. Now, I'll tell you, one of the things we used to do in our house parties, we get 16, 17, 15, 18 years old, we get together and boys and girls, we'd have quite a house party. Sometimes we get, you know, when you get a bunch of youngsters together, you have brainstorms once in a while.
Oh, yeah.
Well, some of those brainstorms was, we get on the telephone, long about 10, 30, 11 o'clock at
Oh,
night,
no.
and we'd call them up, and the man's had some phone. Have you got any spring chickens for sale tonight? Well, have you got any without springs then, and hang up.
That's a bunch of those.
Huh?
That was, I never did that.
We done
Oh.
it several times
We used
in
to do
ours.
that when we were little.
Spring chicken.
Only we didn't ask that.
You have pop in the refrigerator.
Were you the guy that put a wagon on top of a barn once?
Pop in the
What?
A
refrigerator.
wagon on top of a barn?
Yeah.
No,
We're gonna
that
let him out.
That was when my dad was a boy,
Oh.
when Grandpa was born.
No,
Yeah, for a Halloween night, they took a wagon to pieces and set it up on the roof of the barn, straddle of the ridge, put it all together, took the dump planks, what we call dump planks then, and put them on it, which makes a box. And then they loaded the gravel in the wagon, carried it up there by buckets, and when the man got up in the morning, there he found his load of gravel up on top of his barn.
Oh, no.
I bet you tipped a few outhouses over too, didn't you?
What?
Those days?
You tip a few outhouses over?
Oh, that's an old, his outdoor out. That was an old thing. But there was one, I wasn't involved with this. There was a bunch of boys in the ward. Our ward covered about 5,000 or 6,000 acres. A lot of people. They had their horses, you know. So they went to the barn, and they took a horse out of the barn, went over the neighbors, put the horse in the barn, took a horse, went over another. They changed about 6 or 8 horses that way. Never the same horse, just traded, you know. It took those farmers putting their 2 weeks to find their horses.